Hello, welcome to this Tealium webinar, where we're going to address the question, your Snowflake data is ready, is your customer experience? My name's Ross McRae. I'm the field CTO for Tealium here in APJ. We may have met recently at one of the Snowflake World Tour events, in which case, welcome back, it's good to see you. If not, you might just be here to understand a bit more about how Tealium and Snowflake work together. So let's dive into it. So data lives across all of your tools and platforms, but action in the sense of where your customers interact with you, that happens everywhere. And Tealium sits in between. And Tealium's job is to orchestrate customer data, the customer data that you're allowed to use for any given specific purpose, orchestrate that and ensure that all of the platforms where that action's happening, where customers interacting, to ensure that those platforms have got just the right context at the right time. So Tealium is a customer data orchestration platform. That's what it is, and there are four key principles that sit underneath it. Firstly, is trust. We must enforce the consent that's given to us by customers as they interact with us, and only use data for the purposes for which they've granted that consent. And that needs to be automatically applied, and we need to not have to worry about it as a business because it's being taken care of. So that's a principle that Tealium sticks to. The second one is that things need to happen in real time. So from collection to through to ID, resolution, building of profiles, the execution of rules, all needs to happen in real time so things can be delivered in the moment. Thirdly, AI context. Tealium needs to be able to operate such that AI and ML, so whether it's an LLM or whether it's a predictive machine learning model, those kinds of applications, that kind of AI needs to have context. So that's Tealium needs to work with those sorts of technology. And finally, it needs to be composable in the sense that you just need to use the parts that you need to use. And if that includes a kind of zero copy approach where data is pulled from where it already is and activated without ever copying, then that's part of the principle of under which Tealium operates too. There are some key capabilities inside Tealium that you're going to see referred to as we go into what will be quite a deep dive actually today. But things like data streaming and data collection, even zero-party data collection, being able to handle signal loss, for example, make sure data signals get through to real-time identity verification, identity resolution, in fact, bringing together profile fragments and a view of customer right there and then in the moment, whether that's an anonymous browsing device right the way through to when a customer becomes known after they've identified themselves, for example. The ability to interact, as we said, with agents, so methods for interacting with AI agents, human agents, machine learning platforms, in all their different kind of guises that they come. And then this notion of composability, exposing methods that means that different platforms can work with Tealium on in the way that they are required to act for data governance reasons. And underneath the whole thing, of course, is this spine of consent, trust, governance in that data, which Tealium adheres to. So all these capabilities you'll see come to play. But kind of enough about Tealium. We're here to talk about Snowflake. And the way that we think about Snowflake is that it's your source of truth. But the acting on that data is where the gap tends to be. And we have this notion of Snowflake being the governed place where data already is. You're controlling who accesses it. It's holding the data that you're using to run and measure the business on. But then you have these other systems of action where the customer interaction in particular is taking place. And if we go into that in a little more detail, if you think of Snowflake looking like this, we've got operational databases attached to it. Enterprise tools and apps are giving it data. We might have streaming, transactional data or other signaling that's coming into the platform, into Snowflake rather, that describe how the business is operating. Files are coming in, APIs are exposed. So that's what Snowflake's doing. But where the customer is interacting, where is that happening? That's happening in the map, in the app, sorry, the mobile app. It's happening in stores, at kiosks, across the counter, for example. It's happening in chatbots. It's happening as people interact with messages that they are sent or emails that they open. It's happening in the call center, and that kind of data needs to be part of that source of truth, because when it comes to where those interactions are happening and where that view of customer is needed, well, it's needed in those same behavioral touch points too. So web and app agents, human agents or AI agents. It's needed where you're executing your paid media campaigns, for social, for example, and display ads out there. It's needed in your email platforms. It's needed in your CRM platform. So the idea is that where Tealium fits in is Tealium will then turn that Snowflake asset along with the additional data that it needs to really have, the behavioral data, the interaction data, and effectively turn Snowflake into a connected activation platform. And there are a bunch of capabilities which you see on here, which we're going to touch on as we go through how Tealium and Snowflake work together to deliver on that. So let's start with Snowflake Audiences and the Tealium Audience Discovery app. So imagine I've got everything in Snowflake that I need in terms of understanding customers. If I'm in that happy situation, then the first thing that Tealium provides to help you activate data is the ability to create audiences inside Snowflake. So we have the Tealium Audience Discovery app. It's part of the Snowflake app marketplace. And in there is where you go ahead and build audiences, discover audience sizes, examine the data, and decide when an audience should be made active and be able to be activated out to all of those platforms of engagement. And the principle behind this is that build audiences where the data already is, so inside Snowflake. But of course, what holds us back often is, well, that we have a specialist team of SQL engineers that do that. They require a brief, and we require to pull data out and then transfer it somewhere else before we actually activate it. Well, the idea behind the app is that do that work inside this app. No data is moved. We provide, as you'll see in a second, various ways of enabling perhaps a business person rather than a SQL person or a database person to build an audience. And then once that audience is built, to control how, in this case, Tealium will watch for that audience as it changes or as it becomes enabled and activate it. So let's go and have a look at it. So here we are looking in a bit more detail at what's in the app. We're looking at a list of audiences that someone has created, the user has created, and you can see, if you look closely, it's tracking the size of that audience as it changes over time, which I'll talk about in a second, whether that audience is active when it was created, for example, and allows you, this is the kind of the control pane that allows the operator to decide when audiences should be allowed to be acted upon. So if I click on create a new audience, we go through a couple of steps. Now, there are three ways that the app provides that allows the user to build an audience. One is a kind of a point and click mechanism where basically you'd select your table and you go through each of the columns that are in that table and describe what the criteria are for someone joining an audience. Customer value over a certain amount, product list contains, that kind of thing. You can do that with a point and click and drag and drop, or because this is a Snowflake app, don't forget, we've got access to Cortex. So you could, in natural language, just say, find me users who've made an off-road vehicle purchase since 2025. And it will go ahead and turn that into a SQL statement, which you're welcome to go ahead and validate. You can then click on the preview query and look at the data coming in to make sure it matches what you've asked for. It does that in conjunction with the LLM that you've got access to. So all this is all configured inside Snowflake. It's part of your Snowflake environment. Or you could go the SQL route if you can write SQL, then great. But again, remember, this is a Snowflake app. So inside we've got access to the AI query assistant. So again, you can use natural language, and I could just say, find me users who bought a vehicle in 2025 and 2026. They'll also demonstrate an interest in outdoor equipment and gear. So that's something that I can just say. The query assistant will build the query, refine it, and execute it, and I can go and have a look and examine the data that I've now created just with one click of the button. What you can do on top of this is apply an additional filter. So this opens up a nice new way of working. You could imagine I've got a base audience, and all I want to do to create a new variant of it is just add a couple of filters on it instead of creating a whole new query. Well, you can do that in the app here with this filter part of the app. And then the final thing that you do is to say to Snowflake, how often do I want to refresh this audience? And you can make it a one-off thing. I want to do this now. I want to execute a campaign now. So I'm going to make an audience and build it now. Or you can do it on a schedule. And the schedule can be daily, weekly, monthly. In fact, you can put any schedule like there's a cron facility in there, which allows you to create any kind of schedule that you like. So you end up in this situation where you've got a bunch of audiences that are refreshed inside Snowflake, nothing's outside of Snowflake, on any given schedule that you like. And what again, this is a Snowflake app, but it's making data ready for Tealium. So behind the scenes, what it's also doing is it's creating a couple of key attributes, columns in the table that you don't need to see, but row numbers, for example, and date stamps that are looking for change happening. So it does that behind the scenes, but we now have this a series of audiences that are ready to be activated. You control as the user whether they're active or whether they're switched off. Um, and that's it. We're now ready. Now, that's only part one of the story, though, but it is a good part. So I've now got audiences built in a nice, with a nice interface that allows me to have control over it. So part two then is to say, if I want to activate those, what do I do? Well, we have this notion of data cloud activation, which allows you to activate those audiences, stream them out to all of those platforms of activation that we mentioned without ever copying data anywhere. And there's no middle step in the sense that the data stays in Snowflake and is activated through to the end place that it's required. Um, so I've got model data in Snowflake. I've got my activation layer, which is Tealium, out to all of those platforms. Let's have a little bit of a look at it. Welcome to the Tealium UI here. So what you're seeing, and this is just a quick overview, is you're seeing on the left-hand side Snowflake as a source of data, and Snowflake now is, sorry, Tealium now is listening for those audiences that you created, that list that we saw before, and you tell Tealium, in fact, how often to go and check. And it can be near real time. Check that audience every 1 or 2 seconds to see if it's changed, right the way through to any schedule that you like, just like you do over on the Snowflake side. So that's that. And then in the middle, again, just like over in the Snowflake app, allowing you to have extra segmentation. We do the same thing in Tealium. So again, it's a nice usage pattern. I could have some audiences that I've built in the Snowflake app, which are sitting there, and I could have Tealium do a further refined segmentation so I can split where my activation is going based on different segments, but coming from the same audience. So we've got a nice degree of control. Over the right-hand side, then we see all of the platforms that Tealium, there are hundreds of connectors here available, from CRM to marketing automation to site personalization. You name it, we got a platform for it that you can connect to. There's hundreds of connectors there, and that's what it looks like in the Tealium side. So what we're here then, the stage that we're at here is that we've got audiences that we've built inside Snowflake and using the Snowflake app to do that. We've on the Tealium side, we've said listen to those audiences, and as they change or as they're activated in once-off mode, activate those audiences out to any of the channels that we've configured in Tealium. So great. And that's great for kind of batch campaigns. I've got audiences that are now always on and being activated out to all my platforms. What if we now want to move into a more streaming and a real-time mode of thinking? So firstly, what we've just done assumed that we had everything that we needed in Snowflake. Now, what about that behavioral data from app and website, for example, particularly that kind of data which doesn't typically find its way into Snowflake, at least not in real time. So Tealium is built for that. So the first thing that you can do there is stream data into Snowflake. So to give it those extra behavioral insights that you can then use to be building audiences inside that Snowflake app. So just like we were talking about enabling audiences out to all sorts of platforms, when Tealium is collecting data, it can activate that data into Snowflake itself. And so over again in the Tealium UI, Snowflake streaming, then it's the Snowpipe streaming connector that we use. That connector has a bunch of actions that you can then ask it to execute when Tealium events come through. So a page click, for example, or someone moving into a Tealium audience. So we can send event data, like a page view is a good one, a cart ad, that's a good event, example of an event that we might want to let Snowflake know about. Or we can send entire visitor profile, the customer profile data, or even logging data out into Snowflake. So in this way now, Snowflake has now got real-time customer behavioral data flowing through, and now that then enriches and further enables everything you can do in Snowflake. So Snowflake's now an even richer source and a more complete view of customer. So that's streaming data into Snowflake. Now, talking of streaming and doing things in real time, let's look at the kinds of things you can do if you bring the full power of Tealium to bear alongside the source of truth that Snowflake is, even that augmented source of truth with behavioral data. If you bring in some of Tealium's other real-time capabilities, you get a very sophisticated and powerful combination. So we refer to this component of Tealium as we call it just Tealium CDP. But what it's doing is it's collecting data, as I outlined at the beginning, but it's doing the identity resolution. It's building profiles that change in the moment. It's allowing you to execute rules, about what you do with that customer in that given moment as they fall in and out of audience, for example. And it's allowing you to configure all the channels that you execute out to as well. And the critical thing is this is happening across all sources of data and it's happening in real time. And there are a bunch of capabilities that come with that, which enable things like this. And we're going to walk through it. So imagine the case where we've got Tealium inside the mobile app is tracking behavior. Um, and then what we could do is we could call Snowflake. So part of the Tealium CDP platform is it allows you to call out to Snowflake and get a decision from Snowflake about what I might do next with this customer based on the action they've just taken in the mobile app. What we can do with the answer that we get back is change the experience in the app. And then finally, write the outcome back into Snowflake. So Snowflake has this complete round trip closed loop view of what's happened in this particular interaction. So let's go through and see that in action. So just a reminder, over in Snowflake, what you can do is you can build machine learning models. So we've got one here, which is a retail next best action model that we built. And in Snowflake, you can expose a model like that as a service using Snowpark container services. So that model turns into a service that can be called in real time in the moment. And in Tealium, we have some functionality. It's called functions. And in Tealium functions, you can call such a model. In fact, you can call any service. We refer to it as invoking a model. So if you look closely at this screen, you can see that, and we can see that the trigger for us to call this particular model is going to be if someone abandons their cart. So I'm in the mobile app, I abandon the cart. Oh, let's call Snowflake and work out what is the next best thing to do with this customer in this scenario. So with those two things in place, let's see it in action. So what you're looking at here is a trace of a session that's happening. The trace is running in Tealium to observe the behavior of someone who's got the mobile app open. So when they're in the mobile app on this retail site, browsing around, every event, every click, every swipe that they execute in the app is recorded and sent through Tealium. And let's imagine that the user adds something to the cart. This is another data event, sorry, that's going into Tealium. It can be squirted straight through to Snowflake too. So Snowflake's got that add to cart event. And you can be using that to help train AI and ML models over in Snowflake. So we've got our add to cart. That happens. Let's imagine now that this user closes the app, or they go to another screen. They effectively abandon this cart without completing it. In the world of Tealium, we've got rules that you configure that can detect that kind of activity. We mark this person as a cart abandoner, and that will trigger an action in Tealium, as we just saw, to make a call out to Snowflake to say, what's the next best action for this person that's just abandoned their cart? That call is made, and then Snowflake sends back the response. It's too much, the detail's too fine to see here, but inside that response that we're getting, and remembering this is a trace, this is why we're showing this level of detail, but inside there is the next best action that our Snowflake model has set for this person, this cart abandoner. And what we can do, if you look on the right-hand side, is then customize the app with that particular offer and get the user to hopefully, in this case, complete their purchase. The offer that was chosen in this case, this 10% off, was the one that was determined by Snowflake in the next best action model that we've got running there. So we change the experience in the app. Ideally, the person says, yes, that was the perfect offer. They click and confirm their order. That's just another data event. And we're looking at the contents of that data event, that confirmation of order. And in that confirmation of order, not only are we seeing what the order was, but we're also recording the fact that the next best action that was exposed to them was this 10% one that came from Snowflake. And what do we do with that? Of course, we send that back into Snowflake too, so that now it can use that for its ongoing training of its model, and the loop is being completely closed. So very sophisticated and very powerful. There's one more thing I just want to talk about, which is real-time context for AI agents, actually for human agents too. In fact, anything that needs to know in this moment what do I know? What should I know about the customer that I'm dealing with? We refer to this as real-time context, and there is a component inside Tealium called Context API, which whose job it is, whenever it is called, to return a subset of the profile very quickly in tens of milliseconds, so that that calling agent or that calling application can have instant context to use to then personalize the experience that the customer get and where this the customer gets. And where this is particularly powerful is with agentic AI. So what you're looking at now is a retail website, and behind the scenes, a website can make a call to the Context API just like any other application. So again, the detail is perhaps too small to see here, but the point is that with Context API, we can be fetching data from Snowflake. Um, and things like a model score, propensity to buy, or products that are held, things that have been previously built in this example, all those things which are stored in Snowflake, um, can be brought into the web page. Equally, they can be brought into, in this case, an AI chatbot. And then the chatbot itself is using that data to inform its response. Now, the chatbot, in this case, it's being surfaced on a website. It could be surfaced in an app. It could be surfaced anywhere. It could be surfaced inside the platform that your call center operators are using. So a call center operator, contact center operator, could have this kind of context, could have a kind of a co-pilot agent, giving them the same kind of suggested things to say to this customer in the moment based on the context that Context API is fetching back. And critically, that context includes data from Snowflake. Now, if you're looking behind the scenes of an agent, what's it actually doing? Well, what it has is a tool, and the AI agent, the tool that it's got, is basically Tealium's Context API. We use the MCP, Model Context Protocol, to expose that service, and so your agent calls the Context API through the MCP server, the MCP protocol, and that's how the context of that customer, it's the customer profile really gets into the agent and allows it to, when it's using its LLM, to come back with a nicely personalized and relevant response in the text that it gives back. That's how it's working behind the scenes. So powerful stuff. Okay, so we started this session with, your Snowflake data is ready, is your customer experience. Um, and what I hope we've shown today is that when you add Tealium into the mix, with that single addition of Tealium, you got several ways of enabling what's sitting in Snowflake to be more effectively. Firstly, from the point of view of scheduled campaigns, an app to build out audiences, and the mechanism inside Tealium to listen for those audiences changing and to activate them out anywhere. Secondly, we saw the example of kind of triggered real-time in the moment decisioning happening. Call a Snowflake model when something happens in the mobile app, personalize the experience and write the results straight back, so that inside Snowflake you've got a closed loop for enhanced training of models. And then finally, the example of an agent, an AI agent that at any moment needs context, and that context might be sitting in Snowflake. It might also be sitting in a behavioral view, and Context API allows you to bring both of those things or all of those things into the agent, so it has the context it needs to make the right sorts of recommendations. Now, where might you start with this? Well, actually, the order we did things in here is not a bad way to start. Look at what you've already got inside Snowflake and think about activating that. Um, Next, look at what other data, particularly the behavioral data that Tealium is good at mastering and collecting, what other data of that nature, real-time data like that, behavioral data, could Snowflake benefit from, and look at bringing that in, and then perhaps move to the more sophisticated real-time in-the-moment decisioning and the context that agents fetch through. So it's a nice kind of a 1, 2, 3 to gradually empower and make the most out of what you've got in Snowflake. Okay, now this stuff works here in region, in APG. I think Spark New Zealand and Telco New Zealand is probably probably the greatest example that we've got. They're driving significant incremental conversion from data that's sitting in Snowflake. And they're doing it in real time, and they're driving real results. They're making millions of personalized offers per month based on Snowflake decisions, tied or augmented with behavioral data from Tealium. Another example would be Legal & General over in the UK. they're driving incremental applications for financial services products thanks to having Snowflake models alongside behavioral data. 54% call to lead conversion in their contact center when the contact center is operating and when they're using predictive models from Snowflake based on behavioral data as well as other more enterprise data to route their calls inside the call center. So significant results empowered by Snowflake and Tealium together. Okay, and with that, we'd like to really just invite you to turn your Snowflake investment into measurable customer action. Great next step might be to contact us and let's kind of map this in and see how it fits with your existing stack. And we'd love to continue the conversation, so please do reach out. Thank you.